You can start.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I hope I find you well wherever you are joining us from. Good morning, good evening to Neil and others that might be joining us from a different part of the world. I think the day that we've been waiting for is here, and today we want to discuss something that has been affecting us in different ways. And of course, by the end of the session, I think we should be able to understand the impact of risks that are posed at a third-party level, especially within a supply chain management. And with me is Neil Chapman, South African, English, now soon to be in New Zealand, and I think today I will give him an opportunity to introduce himself. Just take us through a bit about yourself, your company, and what you enjoy doing in as far as this security aspect is concerned. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Jazeel, and thanks everyone for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. It's pretty late here, but hopefully it's in a fairly decent time of the day wherever you guys are. My name is Neil Chapman. I'm the co-founding director of CyberCriminals Limited, which is a cybersecurity firm based here in Taranaki, which is in the North Island of New Zealand. As you can hear, I'm not native New Zealand. I'm originally from South Africa, but have worked sort of in the UK, in SA, and here. Our sort of business is focused on third-party risk management. We've got a couple of other subsidiary security services that we offer as well, but TPRM is our sort of core business. I'm hoping that today will give you a little bit of insights, hoping to show you a little bit around how we used to traditionally do it and some of the methods that we use today to try and manage third-party risks. Hope you enjoy it.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, yeah, thank you for that. Just to give you a bit of a background in terms of AR Smart Ideas, we specifically help our clients in terms of the ERP space. And one of the things that we also do that is within the SAP space, that's success factors. That's for your employee and relations in terms of your experience management. And also we do a lot of stuff within the supply chain management. That is your how you would be able to sort of like improve in terms of what exactly you guys are doing within the supply chain. And one of the things that we have noticed, I think, with the passage of time is the rate at which companies get their security breached, and once it gets breached, and because now we operating in a web of other parties, and we have what is now called third-party risk management, like what you was referring to as the TPR. And so we thought maybe, I think it's one of the things that we would engage one of the experts within the space to talk about some of these things. You might be sitting here and maybe you are thinking that what we are talking doesn't concern you. It's not something that may be of interest to you, but I think it's something that we need to be interested in, because if we fail to, take charge of this, then one of the days we are going to be disarmed by intruders, and they will get hold of all, our supply chain, not only our supply chain data, as we are mandated by law to be able to look after the data that we gather in, and once we get breached, I think it's one of the complications that those that we deal business with will no longer be seeing us as secure to deal business with. So I think before we get there, we would love to listen to what is this third-party risk management is all about. How does it come? How can we know that we have been breached, and what should we do? What are the cost implications? And I think some of the things that we can, I think of recently we noticed there was an issue at Transnet where, it got breached, and then a lot of data, was exposed. and we don't wish this to happen to anyone, but we would love to, raise this awareness so that as a company, we have a policy that we can treat with as a matter of agents. I think without saying much, I would like to bring Neil, I think, to take us through what you have prepared for us. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'll just quickly share my screen here, and then we should be good to go. Just to confirm, can you guys see that okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. So let's get into it. So I prepared a little bit of an agenda here today, which we've kind of spoken about already, but a quick introduction of me, which we've done. We'll do an overview of some of the significant third-party breaches that happened in 2022. I then want to take you through the third-party breach report that our technology provider or partner Black Kite prepared recently. Then get into a little bit around what the old traditional ways of third-party risk management were, and sort of enlighten you, hopefully, with some of the newer methods that we're using to help businesses. We're a little bit pushed for time, but hopefully we'll have a session or some time left over where we could do some questions and answers, and then some closing comments from Jazeel after that. Before we get into it, I just want to tell everybody that's joined us today to have a look out for our digital egg. It'll be something that looks very similar to this, that will pop up for a couple of seconds in some of the slides. If you're lucky enough to catch it, there's a 6-digit code on there, and at the end of the presentation, we'll give you some information around how you can use that code to claim a free cyber assessment report that we'll do for your business. So keep an eye out for that. So very quickly, as I introduced myself earlier, Neil Chapman, founding director of Cybercriminals New Zealand. Got 27 years of pretty broad experience working in various different industries, and hopefully I can part some of that experience onto you guys today. Cybergrape, we're born in New Zealand, but we've got an office in South Africa. We've just actually created that office now at the start of this year. We've got some customers already scattered over the world: New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, working on a customer in Mauritius, SA, and we've got some customers in the UK as well. And we have got a number of sort of technology partners that we work with. Black Kite has been the predominant one that helps us with third-party risk management. Right, so I'm going to get into, I've only picked 3 because of time, but essentially the 3 major third-party compromises that we've kind of experienced over the last year. Uber being a predominant one. They were compromised through one of their suppliers called Techquivity, and they were then compromised as well through an AWS server. So what we learned from that hack was that it emphasizes that the owner and the cloud service provider have a shared responsibility in terms of protecting your assets. And so, yeah, that compromise revealed 77,000 employees' private information. And they were attacked by a group called Lapsus, which are fairly prominent in the cyber threat industry, I guess. And they used credential theft by malware, we believe, and MFA fatigue attack. So if everybody's not completely familiar with MFA fatigue attack, where you're implementing good security processes in terms of having that second multi-factor. Often what the guys will do is they will just continuously bombard you with that second factor authentication the whole time. And eventually people tend to click accept because they're trying to get rid of those pop-ups that are occurring on their screen. And so that's a common attack vector that we see in terms of getting around that MFA. Later on in the presentation, I'll demonstrate where the SMS MFA is easily thwarted as well. Another one that's quite relevant to our South African audience is Dis-Chem. I'm sure many of you were made aware of the compromise that happened at Dis-Chem in April last year. Frustratingly, a lot of the information around who compromised Dis-Chem and how they compromised Dis-Chem wasn't necessarily brought to the public attention. As a security practitioner, we don't really condone withholding that information purely for the fact that it doesn't help other organizations protect themselves from a similar type of compromise. But yeah, their 3.6 million customers had their information compromised, which is quite catastrophic. And then obviously the last one here is TransUnion, another one that we're all quite familiar with. Reportedly, there were 54 million records that were compromised. And, that was information like credit scores, banking details, and ID numbers, which are pretty sensitive pieces of information. They used a brute force attack, and the attackers, they're called Nordic TU. They reported that the account that they managed to compromise had a password set to password, which, as many of us know, is a very bad idea. But it just goes to show that there are still people out there that use that type of very weak password. And that's then produced an extortion demand of $15 million US. So there's loads more examples that we could probably get into, but due to time, I thought it would probably just be worthwhile mentioning those three. And so the next part of my presentation I want to take you through is the breach report. So Black Kite did a research on 63 attacks that occurred in 2022. 63 attacks doesn't sound like very much, but they were quite specific around the criteria for their research. And so they only investigated attacks that was a breach via a third party. And interesting, what they found is that from those 63 attacks, it was actually 298 businesses that were compromised as a result, right? So this emphasizes that, having your third parties, you need to treat their security postures the same as you would treat your own, because this is the attack vector that's been preferred by these threat actors. Interestingly, I guess the statistic there is that for each compromise, it essentially shows that it's 4.73 businesses that are compromised through that one attack, which is almost doubled from the previous year. So we're on a trajectory where third-party breaches is occurring more and more often, and we can expect that probably double by another year's time. One thing that I did notice there was that in their report, they specified that the average time between the attack and the disclosure of the attack was 108 days. As security professionals, we tend to sort of mention the time to discovery is usually around 220 days. So that information there has kind of showed me, well, those businesses were quite slow to publicly announce that they were breached, or they were quite slow to detect that they were breached. But it is an increase by 50% from the year before. And then the last part, which is probably a bit more of a sadder statistic, is that nearly half of them, 44%, improved their cyber rating after the incident, which kind of indicates that they had the sort of finance and the resources to be able to put in that extra security, but weren't driven to do so. And I guess that's one of the sort of benefits that we hope to achieve by doing third-party risk management, is that we engage with those third parties, and we highlight where they could have vulnerabilities, and we encourage them to try and resolve those vulnerabilities and actually, reduce the risk for everyone. Some other statistics out of that report were 39% of those compromises was through unauthorized network access. I'll get into a little bit more detail around what each of these actually means. So 27% was ransomware, which was a bit less than what I expected when I opened the report. And unsecured servers sort of amounting to another 10%. So if we dig a little bit deeper into the unauthorized network access, it can often be more complex than it sounds. So just unauthorized access can usually be a result of a combination of attacks. So, typically the way that they would do it is they would obtain some stolen credentials, and they would try a combination of using that with weak access controls. So if you've got identity access management systems that aren't quite fully configured, or they're just using weak usernames and passwords, that's typically how they would gain that access. And then once the attacker actually gets that foothold into the organization, they're then bypassing all of those perimeter security controls that organizations typically have. And they laterally then move across the environment, and they start compromising further and deeper into it. One thing to point out, though, is that these adversaries they don't always have hacker skills. So we've got a threat intelligence product, which is called Black-Wired. And so while I was preparing the slide deck, I went and had a look for some of the information that's coming through that threat intelligence system. And so in the first one here, which was sort of dated, 11th of December, it's an American date. There's somebody here who's selling network access to an organization that's got a 310 million revenue stream. And what's important there is that they're sort of selling it for $200. So what's scary about this is that they're not selling a car. They can sell this information multiple times over and over again. But usually when you see something like this, it's usually around somebody that's got some technical skill. They like the technical challenge of breaking in, but don't necessarily have that further criminal intent to try and ransomware or make more money from it. So they take the easy route and they sell that information on the dark web. And so anybody who doesn't have that technical skill can just go and buy that access. And now they've got one very important factor in terms of being able to break into somebody's network. Another thing that I actually found here, which was quite disturbing, is this character over here advertised that if any of the threat actor groups have got information around Nedbank or MobiCred or ABSA or F&B, then he can facilitate in SIM swaps. So earlier in the presentation, I mentioned around MFA. So this particular individual has obviously got access into some of those mobile phone providers. And so a SIM swap is essentially where they will transfer your number to a new SIM. And that's the way that they will thwart those SMS confirmation codes of getting into online banking. So again, that one didn't necessarily have a price to it, but the fact that they're actively out there and advertising that they can assist you with this type of thing is very scary. Moving swiftly on to ransomware. Like I said earlier, 27% of them, it's the second most frequent attack. It's decreased from 2021. We found that quite surprising because obviously the media and everyone is very concerned around ransomware. But we think that the Russia-Ukraine war has had quite an impact to play in there. Typically, before that war started, a lot of the organized ransomware as a service gangs were operating out of Russia. They've now since been sanctioned. It's very difficult for them to get money in and out. And I think that they've got a concentrating on a war, so they're a little bit distracted by that. But some of the other factors that play into lowering that statistic is obviously the victims these days are less likely to pay, and most businesses are being discouraged to pay the ransom. And another factor there is that the lifespan of these ransomware strains is actually becoming less. So 5 years ago, a strain of ransomware could go undetected for as much as 592 days. And these days, a typical ransomware strain would only last about 70 days before most, protection systems would pick up on those signatures and stop it. There's also another thought in that because the dangers of ransomware are so extreme, that the ransomware groups are actually being a bit more deliberate in terms of who they're attacking. So less is more is one of the strategies that we often hear. And this is specific around third parties and the service providers that, a single hack will then go and compromise multiple organizations that service provider services. So, it's a less effort and more reward. Another thing that we found while we were looking through the threat intelligence was, as recent as the 9th, you could go and you could pick up a ransomware toolkit and buy the decryptor, everything that you sort of need for another $200, and you could send a ransomware into an organization. So if anyone's sort of keeping count, so far we've got network access at $200. We've got the ransomware kit at $200. Don't need any technical ability to be able to sort of obtain those, just a little bit of money. The next part, the unsecured servers, this is probably fairly straightforward to understand, is around systems that are not protected by firewalls. They've got gaps in your web application firewalls. They are susceptible to vulnerabilities. So our friends at Microsoft sent us a number of zero-day vulnerabilities around on-premise Exchange last year. And quite literally, as soon as those were made public, you saw those threat actors spinning up and trying to attack whatever servers they could find on the internet that were susceptible to those vulnerabilities. And then there's also things around like misconfiguration. So even though you might have SSL certificates on your website, having them set where they're not running at a TLS 1.1 or 1.2 can open you up to compromise. Leaving remote access ports like 3389 and port 22 open to the internet, so it's obviously a bad idea. And believe it or not, there are still organizations out there that have infrastructure and using the default usernames and passwords and things like that, and leaving those valid and open on devices can cause those unsecured compromises too. Then the last section I want to sort of speak about is obviously phishing. It's a common threat. Most organizations we speak to these days have got some kind of security awareness program that they're running internally, where your users are sent courses and they are taught to understand how to identify phishing emails that may come into the system. Everybody's got the little reporting phishing button in Outlook now as well. But one of the things I think that most CISOs are concerned about, and globally, is that they are still relying on the user to make the right decision. So all the training in the world, humans are humans, they still make mistakes. And so, what we're kind of driving our customers towards now is not necessarily just around security awareness, although that's a very prominent part, but actually injecting some kind of AI into your email systems to identify where these phishing emails may come from, and to do some analysis around how people typically speak in their emails, whether that language is being used in the email that you've just received, and we can flag emails based on that as well. And then obviously if anyone hasn't heard of ChatGPT, now is a good time to go look it up because it's phenomenal, but it's also being used by the bad guys to go and word their phishing emails correctly, so that those typical spelling mistakes or grammar issues and things that you've been taught to look out for are no longer occurring, in those emails, or they're starting to become less and less. And then, so yeah, just a sort of wrap up on that area there. If you consider all of these vulnerabilities that are potentially could be open in your environment, you add them into, the things that you can buy on the internet, and where these guys are going to help you get past the multi-factor authentications. One of the days, the next screen that you can expect to see is something like this. When I was thinking about this presentation, I thought about just stopping for five or 10 seconds and letting the view of this settle in on people who are watching at home, purely for the fact of the anxiety that it causes when you see this. And so we as security professionals want to try and stop this type of behavior happening and that type of anxiety. So I refrained from that and I started to carry on talking. But we want to try and avoid ransomware, right? So my next section here, I want to sort of touch a little bit on how we used to do third-party risk management. Traditional risk management, we're all familiar with this type of thing. It's a self-assessment questionnaire. We would usually generate or build them internally. It would be a bunch of people that would sit around and make sure we had the right questions. We would send this off to our vendor, and then we would patiently wait for that vendor to come back with an answer or completed questionnaire. And typically around about 2 or 3 weeks' time, we would send an email notification asking them when they expect to get it back. And then somebody would reluctantly go and complete that form and send it back to us, and then we would treat that information as gospel. Combined with that, we used to go and we used to find, internal audit reports. Those things wouldn't be up to date. It would be quite delayed in terms of when the report was, or the audit had taken place, between when the report was issued by the time that it was then sent to us. We would look at things like, the last pen test and possibly what the last vulnerability test or scan would be. And all of this then would get turned into our third-party risk management process, where we would, a group of people would sit and analyze it. We'd pick up things that made concern. It would go round and round in circles. And as you can probably see, this type of process is very slow. It takes a lot of labor, and essentially time is money. So the longer that you're dealing with this information that's been given to you, the more out of date it becomes, and the more expensive it becomes to actually get on top of it. So our approach is a little bit different. We've got a slightly more modern way of doing things, and the fact that we don't actually engage with the third party from the get-go. We essentially go and analyze that third party through open source intelligence, so information that's out there in the public domain about that organization. We look at the third parties from a technical cyber rating. We do look at the questionnaires and the compliance correlations as well. And what we also do is we quantify what that risk would be in a dollar value, so that people that aren't sort of technical, like your boards and things like that, we can essentially represent what the cyber risk of that third party is to your organization should they be compromised. So I realize I'm 34 minutes here, so I'm going to sort of try and speed up a little bit. So I might miss some of the detail that I was planning on getting into. But essentially, some of the things that we look at which weren't traditionally picked up in those questionnaires are things like, how has that organization had any credential leaks, that's been published on the internet? How secure is their email configurations? Would they be open up to phishing emails? Would they be able to stop them? Would they be able to see them? How secure is their SSL that they've got in their environment? So all of this is actually automated. We do a digital discovery of them, and we connect into over 1,000 open sources that stretches across the surface, deep and dark web. And then once we've kind of got all of that information together, we continuously monitor that third party. So the minute that there's a change in their external security posture, we would know about it, which puts us in a very different position than traditionally, where we would wait for that third party to tell us, if they ever told us, about what vulnerabilities they might have. Moving on to the compliance, essentially we do support self-assessment questionnaires, because there are some organizations that still rely on them and need them. But essentially what we do is we map those questionnaires back to industry security standards. So things like NIST and ISO, GDPR as an example. What else that we also do is that, other than those questionnaires, there's also a mapping of all of the vulnerabilities, the technical vulnerabilities that we may have discovered about the organization. Those are also mapped back to those standards and frameworks. And it gives us an idea really in terms of what that organization would look like in terms of, how compliant they are. And then if you see here, there's a blue line, and that would be the level of completeness. So how confident we are that we have all of that information. And then lastly, getting back to the sort of financial probability, using the open FAIR, which stands for Factor Analysis of Information at Risk, we can calculate, based on the vulnerabilities and the compliance, as well as some factors in terms of, how much information that third party might have of our data, and how much that data is worth to us. Should they be compromised, then what is the probable financial risk that our organization would endure as a result of that compromise? And that then allows those sort of senior and those board level people to make an informed decision about how they deal with that risk. Do they transfer that to the insurance? Do they mitigate it by putting in controls on their side of the network? Or do they avoid it altogether and not deal with that vendor? So all of this information together builds up the profile of your third party, and how you choose to interact with them. If they've got weak vulnerabilities, perhaps you don't have automated integration that allows their network and your network to talk to one another. So all of those decisions can be made from that information. We then put all that information into a nice dashboard that you can see. So you've got your vendor and all of that information I've just previously discussed with you. Gives you all of the heat maps. So we move over there, it gives you your cyber rating, your probable financial risk, compliance in terms of everything we spoke about there, vulnerability heat map, so we can tell what are the critical vulnerabilities that organization might have that are exposed to the internet, exactly which categories and how they compare. So your blue line here is the vendor, the yellow line here is the industry they're in. And then we can give you a sort of 12-month historical trend in terms of what that security postures look like. So if we see anything that's drastically changed from their normal, that can create some notifications and some warnings for you too. And then, yep, that's all packed into a single dashboard. So we get a good view of all of your third parties, all of the security vulnerabilities and their cyber ratings and how they are in terms of compliance. And we provide that full picture that you can then make those educated decisions on. And that's it. That's all I wanted to share with you today. I guess the question is, did anyone see the egg? If you did catch the egg and you did catch the code, you can go through to our website, which is cybergraph.co.nz, contact us. If you put that code in the subject line and send us your details, we'll get in touch and we'll perform that security assessment for you as promised. And now I think we're good for questions. Hey, Jazeel?
Okay, thanks, sir. Yeah, well, I was actually hunting for that code or for that egg, but unfortunately, I don't think I managed to see it. So maybe that explains why a lot of the times, you know, these security-related issues, it's there, but people don't see it because maybe it's a myth or maybe it's real that these things becomes too technical or becomes too hidden. I think one of the things that I wanted to ask, okay, maybe before I ask, I wanted to go to the questions. They says, in your opinion, what is the one biggest cybersecurity threat facing organizations today? I think in as far as the issue of third-party risk management we're talking about. And the second one is, what is the best way to teach users to detect phishing and scams? And then, yeah, I think maybe you can take those two questions and then I'll come back to you.
Okay, cool. So the first one about the biggest threat. One thing you need to be aware of is that cyber criminals are opportunists. So they will look for the easiest way to compromise you. And so it might not necessarily be, you know, server misconfiguration or a vulnerability that's in your application. The biggest threat is not closing all of your gaps. You know, it's a question of when somebody will get compromised, not if. And so you've got to ensure that you know, you make it as difficult as possible for them to get into your environment. And then when they're in your environment, make it absolutely impossible for them to get your crown jewels, so your data. So, you know, protect your organization from the inside out as well as the outside in. And don't leave vulnerabilities and patches or patching to the end of the month. As soon as you hear that you have vulnerabilities, address them immediately. You know, as an organization, you certainly, you can't spend a fortune. We all don't have unlimited money, but spend your money in the right places to protect your environment in the correct way. So your biggest threat, really, and I'm sorry to say, is probably your users, because machines don't necessarily make mistakes, people do. And so the best thing that you can do is educate your users, arm them with all the information that you can, and you know, continuously send through security campaigns. Make sure you've got multi-factor authentication enabled. Even if it's SMS, it's better than not having anything at all. And you know, make sure that your users understand the risks. And then the other one was, what's the best way to identify a phishing email? Was that the next question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So look, there's multiple key indicators of phishing. Look out for domains that look fairly similar to the one that you'd expect it to come from, but not exactly the same. That's an indicator. Look out for grammar issues. You know, often phishing emails will have a sense of urgency. They're asking you to do something and that you need to do it quickly. Don't click on links. For whatever you do, do not click on links unless you absolutely 100% trust the sender of the email. And if there's any concern or query or question in your mind where you suspect it might be a phishing link, but you're not sure, contact the person that's concerned. You know, phone somebody if you've got their number, confirm that they actually sent that email or that was the information. By no means should you ever accept an email as for changing account details or payment information. You know, so just be very wary around that too.
Okay, I think with regards to that issue that you talked about in terms of the employees being the biggest threat, in terms of sometimes they they go to sites where they are not supposed to, they end up, being vulnerable to receiving certain links that they end up clicking or not even updating the, what do you call it, the software or the versions that they're supposed to. Sometimes you can see that there is the latest version that is supposed to be installed on your laptop, but for some reason, maybe we may not understand why that is necessary in the first place. And in fact, so the question that I also had to follow up on that is, whatever that we are doing, does that take away the risk that is posed by people doing what they're not supposed to do? For example, clicking on the links they're not supposed to, or visiting certain sites that traditionally we know, I think it becomes a playground for, intruders. So the measures that we are talking about, to what extent do they, cover the effects of people venturing into those areas that you talked about?
Yeah. So look, I mean, for your corporate devices, don't use your work device. If you like looking at videos of kittens on the internet, don't use your work device to do it, right? Keep your corporate device limited to your corporate work, I think, and you use your personal one. So that would be a key advantage for businesses. What we do is we tend to put in extra controls. So we have security around DNS, so that we block certain categories. We block gambling and the X-rated stuff. Things that we don't necessarily believe should exist in the corporate world. And usually where you're clicking on links where you've got malware and things like that, they're usually associated to those types of websites. Look out for, if you're entering any details into a website, look out for that SSL lock to make sure that it's secure. But bear in mind that the criminals are now using SSL to secure their websites as well. So that's not always a telltale sign anymore. Yeah, I mean, my advice is, the best thing that you can do is educate your users so that they don't make those mistakes, rather than hope that they don't, right?
Yeah. And the other question I wanted to find, maybe there could be two questions with regards to the issue we are discussing about the third-party risk management, I think, in as far as supply chain is concerned. So the first question is there enough support from the executive level or top management level in terms of, doing what is possibly enough to protect, or to come up with an IT policy that, that has all the frameworks that are required, to protect an organization from, these attack vectors, should it be coming from, a third party, or should intruders themselves just, hack into our system? Do you think there is enough support from the trends that you have seen? And also, do you think we really appreciate the threat that is actually being posed by, such risks? I think from a supply chain management, is it something that, if I have to go and sit in a meeting from a procurement side, from an IT side, I will likely going to hear some of these topics being discussed, plans being made? Or, like you said previously, where you said sometimes maybe once we have been breached, then that's when we start, rushing to put in place measures and all that. What is your take, and what can you say in regards to that?
So I think your boards are starting to buy into it a bit more. Obviously, over the last couple of years, ever since really COVID and lockdowns and cybercrime has really escalated, I think, over those last couple of years, where before you know, security was a bit of a grudge buy or grudge purchase. And that's because there wasn't anything that you couldn't necessarily visualize the benefit, right? It was difficult to sort of articulate the benefit of it. And usually, I think I read a statistic once that, you know, security was about 6% of the IT spend, and even that was only sort of 10% of your revenue, you know, so there was such a small amount of money that was prioritized for security, and security businesses, security solutions are actually quite expensive, so you wouldn't go and you wouldn't invest in that. Boards these days are actually seeing, they're seeing where businesses are being compromised, they're seeing where, you know, the extortionate, the double extortion ransoms that are coming in, they're understanding the costs that are involved in terms of not being able to operate for, you know, days or weeks on end because they've been ransomware, because of a compromise. So they're paying far more attention to it. And we're seeing now, you know, it is something that is being discussed at board level, whereas prior it was just, you know, just one. It was just a sort of an agenda item on a discussion. So, you know, yes, I think they are seeing more of it. You know, we're talking around, you know, specifically around, you know, SAP today, actually, in terms of, you know, how do we implement security around your third parties. So, you know, if you've got S4HANA and Ariba, and you want to try and put in some automated control to ensure that those Ariba third parties are actually haven't been compromised and are secure, you know, we can actually put automation via our API into that, you know, the purchase order approval process, so that you know, we could essentially interrogate our system via our API, pull back the security sort of rating for that organization before we go through the next section of being able to approve the purchase order. So there's definitely things that you can do to incorporate third-party security into your normal production processes. That doesn't necessarily have to be onerous on the individuals in the organization. Some smarts you can add there. And I guess what we need to try and get right from every organization is being able to get the boards to appreciate the benefits of investing that time and money into securing those processes.
Okay. So I think I saw there's a question that came through. Wonga I think he is mentioning that he couldn't be able to.
I saw that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm gonna I'll post the link.
Okay.
In the chat, and just if that doesn't work, then
okay. And one of the questions that I also heard with regards to the issue we're discussing, I think we understand that with the way things are happening, there's a lot of third-party work that is actually taking place, but then we know that it comes with its own challenges. Let's say, for example, in the South African context, we have got small businesses, and some of them do not have that proper structures. For example, you want to ask who's the risk compliance officer within that organization. Maybe it's a company that precisely has 2 people, 3 people. They don't have the luxury, you know, of having someone like that. As let's say I am onboarding someone who's providing essential services to me, but they may not, you know, frameworks or, you know, all that which is required. What can I do, or what are the right questions that we need to ask to ensure that from a vulnerability, from a risk management perspective, we have that covered? Because if we do not have those questions asked, the right questions asked, then it means we have that attack vector opening up, which can one will sooner, be an entrance into our organization. So what would be some of the right questions that you would want to ask them? If they don't have those capabilities, what would you do? Because that's a reality that you may be faced with.
Yeah, and it's a good question. So there's two things I want to sort of point out there. One is there's a company called Kaspersky. They produced a report at the beginning of the year, which set South Africa in the top 10 targeted cyber attack countries in the world, right? So it's something that we need to be aware of, especially in South Africa, is that it's not just a country in Africa, it's being targeted. And if you think about the entire world, being in the top 10 is a pretty scary aspect. So large organizations must understand that they're going to be targets, and if they're in South Africa, they've got a bigger target on their back. You just need to look at Porsche as an example that I think that was in the news a couple of days ago, where they got ransomware in South Africa. So don't allow the fact that because we're in SA, we can sort of hold back on some of those good security practices. Another thing is, just in comparison, New Zealand, it's an island of 5 million people, and there are 565,000 registered enterprises in New Zealand as well. So by average, 1 in 10 people have got some involvement in business ownership. And so it's an island filled with lots of small businesses from 2 to 3 people. A big business is considered 10, 20 people. So we deal with that type of that organization that doesn't necessarily have the security maturity, nor the budgets to be able to put in all of the controls to make sure that they're absolutely secure. And I guess the thing that we sort of look out for the most is your attack surface secure? So if we run an external scan against your environment, is there anything there that raises concern from a security point of view in terms of your vulnerabilities and your configurations, right? So that's our way of doing the due diligence on them. We could ask them to say, do you run any internal security tools to assess your users, your environment? Do you have a vulnerability management program? Is there somebody who may not necessarily be a dedicated CISO? Perhaps he wears multiple hats. He's the IT guy and everyone else. But is there somebody who has been tasked with the responsibility of ensuring that you have technical security across your environment, right? Are you, as an organization, big or small, investing in educating your staff? Do you run courses? I mean, we run a security awareness course. We charge $2.90 a month per user. It's cheap. It's not expensive to be able to educate your staff. There's almost no excuse for not doing it. And then the next thing is, like, when you're dealing with those organizations, what is their due diligence around using service providers? How do they engage? What insurances do they have? Professional indemnity, public indemnity, all of that stuff. What is the churn like in their organization? Do they have people leaving more often, or is it pretty stable? Because that gives a very good indication in terms of how the business run as well. We've got a list of questions that we kind of run through and work with the organizations to understand what their security posture looks like, what type of, do they outsource their security and their IT to other businesses? And if they do, who are those businesses? I've just got a note to say 5 minutes left, so I'm going to stop there. But yeah.
Yeah, I think thank you so much, Neil, for that. We had so many questions. Some of them we have already answered, some of them we may not have, but I think with what you have already provided for in the conversation and also in the question and answer, I think you tried by all means to try and answer some of those things. And I think of particular note, I think is the idea of the issue around SAP, how we could be able to assist in terms of those clients that are currently using SAP, Ariba. It could be also SuccessFactors, or it could be, S4HANA in whatever format that you have. We would be interested in, taking this discussion to another level. I think if you also go to our website, you will see we do, privacy governance, where you can be able to fill in a form, and then, with the help of our experts, we will be able to come in and do a small, an obligation-free risk assessment in terms of your organization. We check into all of your supply chain processes and see if there are any frameworks that needs to, to be reviewed. And because, I think one way or the other, Neil talked about, us having to set, like maybe most of the companies who spend much, actually it's about 6% of their turnover, which is very little. But one way or the other, I think you will notice that if you don't spend money to bolster your security in terms of what we have talked about, you will spend it in another way. Because if you get breached, your security get breached, and then there's ransom that needs to be paid, you will pay dearly, and you will still have to come back again and invest in terms of security. So why should we wait for our security to be breached and then we will start thinking about it? I think it's a topic that we need to, raise in our boards, raise within our teams, and so that we become comfortable. I think, like you said also as well, within the employees themselves, are they aware of what's happening on a day-to-day when they are creating whatever they are creating, and they end up, mixing business with, their private life. And in the end, they will end up compromising not only the organization, but everyone that they deal with. And there is going to be money that, and reputational damage as well, because the first thing that you hear is it will be on the headline to say, so and so has been breached, and a lot of the company's details, has been compromised. And once that has been an issue, a lot of people will not be as keen as they would have been before to deal with you, because you become synonymous with threats. So why don't you guys, approach us, or increase the level of interest in terms of these topics? And sometimes it's also about, do you even have someone who has the skills within your company to assist you in terms of all this? So there are a lot of things that needs to happen in as far as we can make this topic something that we can benefit from, rather than being on the headline for the wrong reasons. I think on that note, we have noticed some of the questions that we have raised, those that we may not have been able to answer. We will try and answer them. If you can also be upfront and then reach out to us. And also please look out for a copy of the webinar. We will make it available even to those that were not able to attend. We know, I think it may have been a peak time for other people that were busy. You will still be able to listen to it. If there is still anything that you want from us, please feel free. Until we meet again, I think I would like to thank everyone that joined, Neil, and also the team behind the scenes that we're managing for our webinar to be a success. Thank you so much. And to you, Neil, I think it's good time for you to catch up with sleep, although it might be 2 or 3 hours to start another day. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Jazeel, thanks for inviting me. I hope it's added some insight, some value, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much, everyone.
Cheers, everybody.